it's cool. Very cool.
Seems like a good spot to be.
Yeah, just finishing off a long weekend.
Yeah. How's the weather down there?
It's been great until today. Today it's rainy, but you know, I'm indoors working, so it's good.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So Commissioner, I think we're maybe one short of a quorum right now. I'm sure we'll be ready to go here in a minute.
Let's see, one,
Well,
two.
let's see, I've got 7 now. So
All right. Well, we've got 1 minute left.
yeah, one
Put
more
in my
minute.
computer. Yep.
Mhm.
Jeff, it's good to see you outside of the digs that we saw last time, where you were a little different attire and much more flattering what you're wearing right now.
And as far as you know, I'm wearing pants.
I don't even want to know that. Ken doesn't want to know that.
A lot better than a hospital gown. Definitely better than a hospital gown.
Jeez.
Okay, we got a few more folks that I think Michael or Whitney are gonna promote up here in just a second. Let's see. Let's see, so Michael or Whitney, Julie Fitzgerald is on, if you can promote her. Great, thank you. Okay, Chair, I think if you're ready to go, we definitely have a quorum.
That's great. Thanks, and good to see everybody. I would also note, I see in the attendees, you're going to see Paul Savas, who's a
Mhm.
person on the Clackamas County board. Paul and I have worked together a long time. He asked if he could attend one of our meetings and said that he had to watch to see what Tualatin was doing because he was wanting to make certain that they were behaving themselves. He said Frank doesn't do that on the Clackamas County side. So anyway, good to see you, Paul. All right, first item of business is visitors' comments. Stephen, anything?
Whitney, I don't believe we had anyone sign up for public comment today. Is that correct?
No public comment.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I don't know that I recognize Paul. The rest of us know each other. Is there anyone? I don't recognize the gentleman there by the name of Truax. What's he got on his face? Did you grow? No, it's fuzzy. I thought you'd grown a whole beard there, but I see now. I'm sorry, Pete. I thought.
Okay, no offense taken.
Yeah. It's
I
the eyes.
guess
It's the eyes. I thought you had a beard. I just was
little beady here. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, I don't think there's anybody else that's new to us there. That's great. Okay, consideration of the minutes of May the 17th. Any comments, questions? Can I have a motion then, please?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, did you catch the motion in the second, Stephen?
I did not.
I
Second.
moved.
Okay,
I was
Okay.
one.
Stephanie and Terry.
Got it?
Third one and
Okay.
two. Okay, perfect.
Thank
Any
you.
discussion whatsoever, changes? All in favor, then just raise your hand. It's easier. Yeah.
Aye.
Anybody in opposition? All right, that means that we have passed the WCCC meeting minutes from the 17th of May. There's a TIF and what we call TIF and TDT request, the City of Banks and the City of Tualatin. I always say that those are somewhat perfunctory and that it's their money and they're asking for certain expenditures under the countywide system that we've all agreed to spend money on. Aaron, is there anything that we need to hear about those two requests?
Both of the requests meet the requirements for the expenditure and the TAC recommended approval at their last meeting.
Okay, perfect. Any questions at all about those two items? Can I get a motion then to approve those two requests?
I'll move
So
approval
moved
of
by
both of
Callaway.
those.
Stephen, did you catch that?
I'll second it.
Okay, so who did the motion then? I'm sorry.
Callaway.
All right, thanks.
Okay, there's been motion, been seconded. Any discussion whatsoever? All in favor, say aye, or raise your hand. That's much easier
Aye.
in this environment. Okay. Any opposed? Okay, unanimously passed. Thank you. One of the things that we always like to talk about is the Misstep Opportunity Fund. As you can see, this is going to be a large request for what's remaining. And Aaron, you're going to chat a bit about that.
I am, thank you. Washington County is leading the preparation of a RAISE grant application for the design and construction of the Council Creek Trail. While Washington County is leading this application, it is being done in close partnership with the cities of Cornelius, Forest Grove, and Hillsborough, as well as with our regional partners, Metro, ODOT, TriMet, and a number of strong community supporters. This is an outstanding opportunity to complete a regional trail project, and we believe that it meets the RAISE criteria to a really high degree. We understand this is a big ask from the Misstep Opportunity Fund, but this project does serve multiple jurisdictions, and it could leverage over $20 million in federal funds. Given how competitive the RAISE grant program is, we may not be successful this year in our first attempt. It's pretty common for these projects to need to go through once or twice before they're funded. However, we'll know later this year in November if we are successful. If we're not, then the funds will stay in the Misstep Opportunity account, no problem there. If we are successful, we'll have until 2024 to actually obligate the funds, at which time we'll be in the next cycle of the Misstep program. The way that we phrased this ask is that we're asking for up to $3.2 million. As a part of the application, we need to assure that we have the local funds available. However, the project team would commit to finding other local funds as well in the interim before 2024, so that we would leave the Misstep Opportunity funds available for other projects that may come in the interim. So that's a pretty quick overview of what we're asking for. Again, this is a really outstanding project that serves multiple jurisdictions, and we think this is a pretty competitive application.
Aaron, since we have some new to us, meaning this year, mayors and others, explain what that fund is for and what kind of money we have typically put in it, and what's the prognosis for future. And you're going to say, I don't know. That's up to the board, I suppose. In this one,
Sure.
as well as the other board.
So the RAISE grants are a federal grant program. It's the program formerly known as Tiger and formerly known as BUILD. So with our new administration and the new Secretary of Transportation, they took the previous BUILD grant criteria and reworked them a little bit. So these grants this year have a much higher emphasis than previous years on projects that consider equity, projects that consider climate change, and projects that serve kind of a multimodal transportation function. So we think that this is a really ideal project because it clearly meets all of those criteria. The RAISE grants are eligible for funds up to $25 million. Our understanding from applying for BUILD grants in the previous cycles are that asking for about $21 million is really the sweet spot for this funding program, and that's where we're at with this project. So that's another reason why we think this is a really competitive program. These grants are spread all across the United States usually when they're funded. They're very competitive. I think Oregon was successful in the BUILD grant program for one project that was between Oregon and Washington, I think. I could be misremembering that. So it's a very competitive program overall. So we shall see, but I think that we have a really good competitive application here.
Thank you, Aaron, for the nice summary of the RAISE. I was really referring to Misstep because our friend, the mayor of Forest Grove, always asked the same question, which is a good one. How much money's left and what's in there and what's the prognosis for more
Okay.
money being put in? So
I can
real
answer
quick.
that one then. So
Yeah.
there's about $3.2 million left. So that's why we're asking for up to $3.2 million. We acknowledge this is a really big ask from the program. And if we're successful in this grant application, it would essentially obligate all of the funds that are available there. Looking forward, as far as other grants that could come through in the next year that would ask for these potentially as a match, we have heard from THPRD that they may be applying for 2 federal grants in the fall, and they'd be asking for a match of about $500,000 for both of those. We'll also have the regional flexible funds applications come through in, I think, February, and so we could have asks for matches for those as well. So our thinking on this is, for the THPRD grants, we could choose to let those go through. And that would just mean that if those grants are successful and our RAISE grant is successful, that we would need to come up with other funds from somewhere else, which would most likely be transportation development tax funds, if we need a bridge of a couple $100,000 in order to make that happen. We'll also be going into the process of prioritizing the next cycle of MSTIP. And so maybe we'll have a better understanding of the board's direction on a next round of MSTIP opportunity funds by the fall. And then by the time we get to the regional flexible funds decision, we'll know whether or not we got the RAISE grant, and we can reassess at that time.
Thank you. The only point I was trying to make, thank you for the update, is that we're not clear at this point whether that opportunity fund will be refunded again, or funded again, I should say. In many of the cities, this has been wildly successful in terms of matching grants. So if the board isn't encouraged, which I hope they are, to replenish this fund, that they should do that. And secondly, what's going to happen if we oversubscribe in terms of we're asking for all of it, which I knew. But I think there's a bit of risk. I mean, you know, REFA funds are, the regional flex funds are always, there's something in there that somebody's asking money on. So, okay. Anyway, I think everybody understands what the issues are. Is there any questions about, I know this is usually a pretty simple one, but because it's stripping all the money potentially, we may not have anything left.
Mayor Truax has his hand up.
Please, Pete.
Well, I was going to wait until somebody else made the motion. I don't want to be the person to make the motion to adopt. So I'm going to hold on my comments until after we have something on the floor to discuss. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Pete. Is that Mark? I think he's up next. And then Steve
Yeah.
after him.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me who makes the motion, but I'll be supporting a motion if it gets made. I have said in the past, probably not in the seat here at WCCC before, but certainly talking to Mayor Doyle back in the day, when the current round of MSTIP was put together, I thought that the opportunity fund should be larger back then as well. I think that this is one of those great opportunity funds. This is one of those great opportunities within the MSTIP program for the local jurisdictions to all be working in parallel to try to get projects matched up against grants from outside. The leverage opportunities are great. The opportunity for sort of some version of local control of the generosity of the county board is really valuable. And I know that we are in the early stages in the city of Beaverton of developing our city recommendations to the county board on the next round of MSTIP funding. But I strongly suspect that a suggestion for a large allocation to the opportunity fund is going to be part of that recommendation. So I will be strongly supporting this on behalf of Beaverton today.
Thank you, Mark. And Steve, were you next? Yeah.
I'm not sure, but assuming the opportunity funds endorsed to continue, when would MSTIP 3F funds become available?
So we're currently looking at starting in 23-24 would be the fiscal year for the next round of MSTIP Opportunity Fund.
Thank you.
I'll come back to Pete because I know he wants to make a motion, but is there any other questions? I like all of you, I approve this project, but want to make certain that you knew that we don't have a lot of other funds, so everybody's aware of that. That's great. Pete, do you want to make a motion?
Well, I don't know how correct it is for me to make a motion since my city is one of the partners in this proposal, but if I'll move for the project.
Second.
And it's been seconded by Mark. Did you get that, Steve, is there any other questions or comments regarding this item? Yeah, Terry.
So I just want to understand, so this will deplete the current bucket of money, the MSTIP bucket, right? Then this board then needs to come back at some point and decide if MSTIP is going to be funded for the future. And then it's also my understanding then if they do, then the next round was stated as 2023, 2024.
All of what you said is correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I'm clear on that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. It's been a wonderful program, and we all, for those of you who've been around for a while, we established it because we knew the matching was important. So,
Yeah, it has been a wonderful program, one that my city has definitely used and been able to take some of the opportunity from the Opportunity Fund. But I also know that this project, the Council Creek project, and I've reviewed some of the documents, is amazing and it's well needed. So it's a very, very important and viable project that I too will support.
thank you, Terry. Keith, I think I see your hand up.
Thanks, Roy. Just separate from this, I'd be curious to get an updated just where we've allocated and it's ended up being used opportunity dollars in this cycle, in this 5-year cycle. Just so
Can we,
people know
can we do
where
that,
it's been.
Stephen? Yeah, can we do that and send it out to all the mayors?
Yeah. Aaron, you've got that as an
Yeah.
action item?
Yes, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Pete, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. I guess my support of this is obvious. When I ran for council back in 2000, one of my goals was to extend the MAX line from Hillsborough to Forest Grove along that same rail line. So here it is 21 years later, and we saw how successful that's been. But the other thing is that this is an opportunity to finally get something onto that rail line other than twisted railroads and rotting ties. That line has not been used for almost 3 years now. If we could take the rail out, we'd have between 50 to 75 feet of right of way for a pedestrian / bike trail, and maybe somewhere down the road, further conversations about either extension of the MAX line or some sort of bus rapid transit along there to make moving from Forest Grove to the government station, through Cornelius to the government station, a little bit quicker. All that's not possible if we don't get a handle on what we're going to do with this land now that Portland Western is vacating their easement, and conversations with the state of Oregon over the rail line itself can begin to be conducted much more seriously. So, hoping for a yes vote, I want to thank you all.
Thank you, Pete. I think Juan Carlos, you have your hand up as well.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rogers. Well, first and foremost, buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see folks on the Zoom call. I similarly wanted to express, my support of this project and what a wonderful job that the cities and the county on the West End have done to build community support and you get community input on what the project should detail. And I'm very hopeful that we'll have additional regional transportation dollars to invest in projects like this within the decade. So thank you so much for the work and for using this fund as a match.
Thank you, Juan. Anyone else before we vote? Any other questions, comments? All right, all in favor, raise their hand, please. Saying that's a yes.
Aye.
Any who disapprove, raise your hand, please. Looks like it was unanimous. Thank you. And Aaron, thank you for your presentation. We're now going to move into the Metropolitan Regional Mobility Policy Update. Kim is I see her right now. I always say affectionately, she's an expert at this stuff. We worked together a long time, and I know the presentation will be good. So, Kim Ellis, without any other comment, would you like to just jump right into it?
Great, thank you, Commissioner Rogers. And Stephen, Glenn Bolin is also joining me from ODOT. So if you could promote him to be part of the question and answer. But I am going to go through a brief presentation just to share where we are. Next slide, please, Whitney. I am Kim Ellis. I'm the project manager of this joint effort to update the region's mobility policy. It's a joint effort between Metro and ODOT. And today we're here to share the draft elements that we've been seeking feedback on over the past month, as well as measures for us to move forward into the next phase of testing this summer. So today I'll give you an overview of what we've done, the draft elements and measures that we've been sharing and getting feedback on, and then talk about next steps to go forward and do some additional analysis. Next slide, please. The purpose of this project is to update how we define and measure mobility for the Portland area transportation system. The current policy that's in place, that's adopted in the regional transportation plan, as well as policy 1F of the Oregon Highway Plan, is a volume to capacity ratio measure, which I think many of you are familiar with. That measure really in the policy is a way to define adequacy of the system. This project is trying to identify a more holistic set of measures to address sort of all the dimensions of mobility, not just vehicles, but really focusing on people and the things that people need to have good mobility on our transportation system. This work will, because the policy currently lives in the Regional Transportation Plan and Oregon Highway Plan, will lead to amendments to both of those documents that would be considered by the Metro Council and the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation as part of the next RTP update. And the Oregon Transportation Commission would consider the amendments to the Oregon Highway Plan as an amendment, either through the current update or subsequent to that. Next slide. As I said, the current policy that's in place really touches, it's a volume to capacity ratio, but it really touches a whole host of decisions at the state level, at the regional level, as well as at the local level in your city and county plans. At the regional level or at the planning for the future and system plans like the Regional Transportation Plan or your locally adopted transportation system plans, corridor area plans, we use the volume to capacity ratio as a target to identify deficiencies in the roadway system and at intersections. At the plan amendment level, local governments, so cities and counties, when you're contemplating changes to your zoning or your comprehensive plan, as a plan amendment, the target becomes a standard and is applied to state-owned roads per the targets or standards set in the Oregon Highway Plan, and then locally adopted standards. And typically, the locally adopted standards are the same as what is in the Oregon Highway Plan. And what happens is you have to evaluate what the transportation impacts are of that land use change. And if you cannot demonstrate that you meet that standard, then you either have to mitigate by identifying additional solutions, not always roadway, but often it is adding additional capacity at intersections or links, or change the land use amendment in a way that would allow for meeting that standard. It's also used at the local level to assess system development charges and traffic impact fees, and to identify projects for developers to contribute to help the system perform as developments go through the approval process. It's also, this volume to capacity ratio is also used to inform how designing and operating roadways. And in many cases, that is a more stringent standard than what is adopted in the RTP and the Oregon Highway Plan. While this measure affects all of these different applications, this project is really focusing on the system plan, so the planning for the future, as well as the plan amendments to better help and better consider sort of the more holistic view of mobility. Next slide. This shows the overall timeline. We've been doing a lot of background work and research to help inform what we are developing to take forward to do some additional analysis and actually apply some potential options or new measures that are more holistic through case studies this summer. And that is where right now the engagement that we're doing in briefings is to get feedback on the elements. What are the most important outcomes around mobility that should be part of the updated policy, and then potential ways of measuring those outcomes. We would then develop a series of case studies, report the findings back in the fall, and based on what we learn and additional feedback from you and others next fall, we would use that to shape an updated policy that we would bring forward for consideration by the Metro Council and JPACT and apply as part of the next regional transportation plan update, which will begin next year. And then, as I said earlier, it would be forwarded for the state Oregon Highway Plan amendments would be forwarded to the Oregon Transportation Commission for their consideration. Next slide. We're grounding this work in advancing the 2040 growth concept. That's our adopted land use plan for the region under state law. And under state law, transportation plans must be determined adequate to serve those land use plans. So the regional transportation plan serves as that at the regional level, but at the local level, city, counties, your comprehensive plan and your transportation system plan, must be in balance. And so your transportation plan must be adequate to serve your adopted land use plans. Next slide. We're also grounding this work in the 4 regional transportation plan priorities. The mobility policy is one of many policies in the regional transportation plan, but the updated policy must advance our regional goals and policies around equity, climate change, improving safety, as well as managing congestion. And so priorities are really serving to guide how we're thinking about this updated policy. Next slide. Similarly, the Oregon Transportation Commission over the past year has been doing work to develop what they've called their strategic action plan priorities. One category of those priorities is a modern transportation system. That too is focused on improving safety, accessibility, mobility, as well as addressing climate change through a broader range of mobility options and congestion relief, particularly in the Portland area. So this work really, their priorities really align with the region's priorities around how we want our transportation system to perform and function, and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with investments in that system. Next slide. So as part of our background work, we looked back at how through the last update to the regional transportation plan, people were talking and thinking about mobility from various different perspectives as a starting point to identify what elements are really most important to include in this updated policy. And what we heard, and this was reaffirmed in earlier stakeholder scoping to develop the work plan for this project, is that mobility is about getting where you need to go safely, affordably, and reliably, no matter where you live, how you're traveling, what's your age, gender, race, income level, or zip code. It's also about moving people and moving goods predictably and efficiently. And then particularly on the freight movement, efficient freight movement is really critical to the state's economic success and ensuring efficient movement and access to industry and ports. Our region serves as a hub for freight movement through the region and to get goods from other parts of the state and out to world markets. So this is all of these different dimensions are things that we're trying to better reflect in the updated policy and definition of mobility. Next slide. We also sort of recognize that mobility is about moving, but people aren't just moving to move. They're moving for different reasons: to get to their jobs, to get to school, to get to visit family, to vacation or recreate. They travel on all parts of the system and to many different destinations throughout the day. And then by the available modes or modes that are available. And so travel options are another important aspect of this and how we're thinking about it. Next slide. So these 5 elements were elements that we identified as draft elements to include in the updated policy to try and reflect what was important for people and goods in the region. And as I said, we've been going around to seek feedback through a whole host of engagement, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But we want this policy to think about access, that all people and goods can get where they need to go. They can get there in a reasonable amount of time. That travel time is reliable or predictable, so you can count on the transportation system to get you where you need to go and at different times of day, that it's safe for all users, and that people have and goods have a variety of modes to choose from to get where they need to go. Next slide. We've also identified several measures that really are different ways in which to consider those elements of mobility. As a starting point, we had more than 40 measures to begin with. We went through a series of screening that we worked on with Metro's technical advisory committees, the Transportation Policy Alternatives Committee and the Metro Technical Advisory Committee. And these 12 measures sort of rose to the top based on that evaluation. And part of the evaluation was not just were they connected directly or indirectly to those elements, but also do they help us inform some of those aspects of the RTP priorities around climate, safety, equity, in addition to congestion. So we know that we aren't going to be able to, or we don't think that we'll come out of this with one single measure, that it's likely to be more than one measure that we'll need to think about just because of how multidimensional mobility is. Next slide. And that mobility and how we think about it really is going to vary by land use context as well as transportation context. So mobility in a downtown or business district, Main Street, where people are walking, biking, accessing transit, will be quite different than in an industrial area that's shown in the graphic below, where freight trucks, while in a downtown district, need to be able to make deliveries. In an industrial area, freight trucks need to have adequate access to the sites, industrial areas, but we also need to ensure that we're providing good walking and biking connections for people to be able to get to transit, but also to other destinations that may be nearby. Or driving or commuting to work in these areas. We also know that on major urban corridors like TV Highway, for example, or McLaughlin Boulevard in Clackamas County, that those routes are also serving as important transit routes, important commuter routes, important freight routes, connecting from the interstate to industrial areas. And then of this, and that's like Highway 217, US 26 in Washington County. And those routes are serving for longer distance trips, but freight trips and also transit trips that we need to, while they don't provide direct access to land use, they are serving an important transportation function. And so how we think about mobility in those places is also going to be different. And so the policy needs to sort of recognize that and be able to be tailored and flexible to those different types of places and facilities. Next slide. So throughout May and June, we've held several forums, 2 practitioner forums where we had over almost 150 people participating, planners, engineers, transportation modelers from across the region, state agencies, cities and counties as well. We also convened a forum of freight and goods movement perspectives, and then a community leaders forum. We've also been briefing the Metro Council, as well as the policy and technical committees at Metro, and then each of the coordinating committees at the county level, the policy and staff level, to basically share these draft elements, get feedback, which we're seeking today. And we are working to develop some refinements to the elements and measures based on all the great input that we've heard. Next slide. Some of the key highlights of what we've heard is people would like to see equity and climate be more explicit in the updated policy. Some of the things that people found were missing from the draft policy elements is that while the draft element really focused on access to places, access to travel options is also important. Affordability is also a key element of access, and should be considered in this. And the efficiency element really focused on time efficiency. What we've been hearing back is that it's not just about the time, but how efficiently are we using the system? And so that sort of spatial efficiency and the efficient use of the system is important for us to be including in those elements. And then the last bullet is really around ensuring that the policy is thinking about the quality connections between travel options. It's not just having travel options available, but that the options are integrated, well-connected, and coordinated in a way that you can use multiple modes to make your trip, because most people, walk to transit, or you use multiple modes for different parts or different types of trips throughout your day. Next slide. And then on the measures, in the 12 that were included in your packet, there's the notion that it's really important that this policy be focusing on people and places. The current mobility measure is vehicle focused, and there is a sense that some of the measures that are still being contemplated, that there is still a focus on vehicles. And so just to be sure that we're being multimodal, which is a goal of this project. And we need to ensure that we're reflecting all of the elements and the measures and all of the modes and elements in the measures. There are multiple measures around congestion. There were multiple measures that are related to multimodal level of service. So in the end, once we go through the next step of analysis, we really need to ensure that we're not being redundant in measures and really look for ways to combine and think about them in that way. Finally, the last couple are just ensuring that we're being flexible and recognizing that there are going to be different measures for different contexts and applications, but we also want, particularly for the plan amendments, it's important that this not be overly complex. The process of traffic impact analysis that has to be completed to do the plan amendment process is already somewhat complex using one measure. And so we need to be thinking about that. And then also important is that right now, the volume to capacity ratio is the most widely accepted, has been in place for many, many years. And we need to ensure that this work leads to establishing the legal nexus for local governments to be able to collect system development charges and mitigation that's really advancing this updated policy. And so that's another key aspect of this work. And then the last thing to highlight is just as we've been going through the different forums and discussions, those three measures there, access to destinations, travel time reliability, and system completeness have been sort of the measures that have been rated as sort of at the top of the consideration. Next slide. So this is just looking ahead in the next 6 months. We are working to seek JPAC and Metro Council direction on the elements and measures to move forward for further testing this summer. And as I said, we'll come back in the fall to share what we've learned. for further input and review, and then use that as a basis for updating the policy through next spring. Next slide, please. So I'll stop there, and Glenn Bolin is here from ODOT as well to help respond to questions, but we'd really like to hear from you today. Is there anything missing that you think we should be thinking about that you haven't heard? And then if you have thoughts about what elements or measures are most important in different contexts, we'd also like to hear that as well. So I'll turn it back over to you, Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Kim. Before we start the question, is Glenn going to make any presentation or only simply answering questions, right?
Correct.
Okay, you're here for questions. Thank you. Questions. I've got the split screen, so I can't see them all. Stephen, can you see anybody with a raised hand? Or?
Yep, we have Mark Sansucci has his hand up.
Please, Mark.
Well, it was mean to be the first, but thank you very much, Kim and Glenn, also for being here today to talk about this. I have to admit, I have not tried to follow the details of the grinding on all of the different potential measures that have been going on through this project, but it does remind me of some frustrations that I experienced as a planning commissioner, both here in the city of Beaverton and for Washington County, when there seemed to be this really strong over-reliance on volume to capacity ratios in determining pretty much everything about how transportation impacts would be gauged when land uses were proposed in the context of development. So it raises some questions for me, and I am hoping that maybe you can point me to some information that the study has used that could help me answer these questions for myself. One is, what exactly is the definition of capacity? Both roadway capacity, but especially intersection capacity. What are the tools or the techniques used to measure that? And are those locale specific or context specific? And then sort of related to that is perhaps an even broader question, which is what exactly is the definition of congestion? And how do you measure congestion? What is the scale on which congestion is laid? And again, is that locale specific, or is that a universal that is applied in all contexts? Because it seems to me that if we're looking for measures of congestion, we need to understand what we're measuring in order to say, yes, this is congested, or no, that's not. And similarly, if we're using volume to capacity in any aspect of this work, we have to understand volume is easy to measure. Capacity is, frankly, seems to be harder to measure, and that's really crucial to the ratio that is used for determining impacts of transportation things. So hopefully there's some information out there that the work is already dug into, and I'd be love to look at that and offer specific comments on it. But I think that with respect to the questions you have showing on the screen here, we will always be interested in measures that are locale specific and not universally applied to all jurisdictions and all locations and all intersections and all roadways. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Is Jeff up next? Well, do you want to tell him where he might find that information before he goes off?
Yes. Councilor Sansucci says there is flexibility in how capacity is defined and how congestion is defined and measured at the local level. Even the current policy around defining congestion, it's using that volume to capacity ratio, but there's other ways of measuring it around delay. Speed is another aspect, queuing at intersections, which is the amount of time it takes for vehicles, but a lot of them are all vehicle based. And that's what this work is trying to do, to move beyond just measuring the number of vehicles that are at an intersection relative to the capacity, which, the capacity, your first question was, how do you define that? Well, it's right now, the capacity is defined as the number of vehicles that can fit in a lane or fit at an intersection at a certain cycle of green time. So so I can point you to some of that background work that defines that, but we are trying to look at it in a more holistic way so that it isn't just about the number of vehicles, but it's actually about the number of people, and people that could be in a vehicle, but they could also be on a bus, they could be biking, they could be walking as well.
Thank you. Jeff, I think, is next.
Thank you. Kim, I'm glad to see that we're moving away from that particular way of capacity measurement. Definitely when we're talking about using the other measures where it's like travel time, when the travel time is half an hour or 1 hour, depending on when you use it, that's got to be, it's 100% delta in the capacity. That's got to be something. I think we also can't afford to lose sight of things that cause tremendous capacity impediments, right? We all like to see the buses get used, but when we don't provide a place for a bus pullout so that we have someplace safe, the bus can get out of traffic, you cut your roadway by 50% because you have this bus parked in the lane, and we see accidents repeatedly as people try to get out as they're driving out from behind the buses. So to be able to have those considerations understood, right? That when we're trying to use TV highway is our best example, right? We're trying to get multimodal on there. We're trying to use the bus. It's always been used for bus rapid, equivalent of, well, we lost bus rapid when we lost the high speeds to Portland. But basically those design elements and those understandings. I think as we look at the different criteria for areas as you brought up, TV highway continues to scare me, right? Because you have businesses, bars, restaurants, whatever, that are all along this thoroughfare. And then my latest experience has been the tremendous amount of 18-wheelers parked in the center of TV highway in the turn lane, and then people using their hand trucks to deliver products to these businesses along, because while these are neighborhood shops and businesses, they can't get deliveries because deliveries are all done by 18-wheelers. So there's this poor delivery guy shuttling product on a hand truck out of the middle of a 40,000 car a day highway to the business next door, because that's the only way they can do. So I think we have to look at those design elements too. It's not just how are these neighborhoods serviceable, So I think it's good to see us move away from some of that classic just car, because we know that we're at 100% capacity on 217 every afternoon because the cars are sitting there parked like a giant parking lot now that we've returned to pre-pandemic traffic. So thank you for the consideration of the other items and hearing our feedback on this today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Dillon.
Thank you, Jeff. I think Steve is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kim. It's good to hear this again, and I appreciate. I can see some of the, the changes that have been made, based on feedback and input. So thank you for that. I would just like to, I guess, just reiterate that I think emissions, should be considered, included as a mobility measure. Partly I see it as an equity issue because. If I'm sitting in congestion and it happens to be in an area, where so many of our freeways have been located, which tend to be lower SES, high BIPOC, areas, then the emissions that are coming really have an impact, a direct impact on their health. And, and there are times I've mentioned before, I can get into Portland, for an impact meeting. Some days it can be 25, 30, 35 minutes. Other times it can be over an hour. So more than just the vehicle miles traveled is the emissions, that I'm expelling, on the trips. With regards to the engagement, and I don't expect you to have an answer, but I'd love to hear how many of these individuals have been from Washington County, just to make sure, and, that I guess that we're assured that there's a good, well-rounded representation from, Washington as well as Clackamas and Multnomah counties. I appreciate Councilor Sansucci's questions about definitions, because, I'm wondering with time efficiency, which is getting to where you need to go in a reasonable amount of time, reasonable is, I guess I'd like to know, what's the definition of reasonable? Because I swear, when I'm driving, there are people whose, 'cause who are driving a lot faster, who have a faster definition for reasonable. And so if there was some commonality, that would be great. And also Councilor Sansucci mentioned, the importance of, locales, and I really, I agree with that, and would like to see volume to capacity included, so that if a city wished to use that as part of their planning, they could. If Metro or ODOT or, another city chose not to, that's fine. But, if we're going to be able to have legal leverage, with our developers, that volume to capacity is really important. And that's important, to help make sure that our arterials, are our arterials, and that we don't get traffic off onto the side streets. And so I just don't want to lose that as a tool for our cities.
Great. Well, just on your question on the engagement, we are preparing a stakeholder engagement report that should be available in the next week, where we are documenting, who all attended. And I would say that there's been really great participation at the staff level from all across the region, as well as at the other forums. And then, obviously engaging each of the coordinating committees and the elected bodies or elected officials around all parts of the region through that mechanism. But we've had very great participation from all across the region, including Clark County, Washington.
Thank you. Is there any other hands raised, Stephen? I don't see any. Are you shaking your head no?
No, we don't have any. Sorry, couldn't find the mute button.
Kim, I have a couple of quick points. One, I would certainly encourage that there be some definition of equity and climate. I'm seeing that's words that are placed into every document. And in talking with people, everyone has different definitions of what those mean. So, and I understand they're different in different arenas, but I think that you ought to define what that means. Mayor Callaway just brought up an issue of carbon monoxide is in certain areas where traffic is stalled. So, I mean, everybody is trying to figure out a nexus between your proposals of equity and climate and understand what that really means. And you probably have around that table 35 or 40 different opinions, depending on how many people are sitting. So I would encourage that there be some definition.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
The second thing is that during my tenure on JPAC, I always stressed that these were regional systems that had to have connectivity between each of the regions or areas in the region. If they didn't, they really weren't serving a purpose that people could support from other parts of the region that were outside wherever the project was being done. And why I say that is when you start getting into your downtown business districts and you start talking about particularly active transportation, sidewalks, bike paths, unless it's a part of a regional system, or a trail system, unless it's a part of a regional system, I hate to see it go to a point where we start siloing again, like in the old days where we all fought. I mean, JPAC was just a battlefield for getting money for our respective jurisdiction. And we've kind of gotten away, or they do, I don't know where they're at right now because we haven't been there last meeting or two. But I'm hoping we're not going back to that of, gee, I want projects in my area at the expense of everybody else, but I can't, it's kind of like the bridge to nowhere. I can't see that the sidewalk project ties into a bus system or ties into a regional system of any other type. So I just caution that we're not getting back into the old days of silos and you might have everything up, anything you want up there, but we all know it only takes so many votes at the table. So my point is to maybe flush that out a little bit and understand what people mean by a system-wide project. And I'm talking about projects.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's my comments.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. One thing I may not have been clear about was that we are focused on the arterial network. So basically facilities that are defined as part of the regional system in the regional transportation plan, which primarily are the arterial streets, and then the throughway system, which ODOT owns. Any road that ODOT owns would be part of this as well. But we do have a regional system for active transportation that's designated in the RTP. We have a regional transit system that's designated. We have high injury corridors that we've designated, equity focus areas that are of regional significance as well. So those are all, your point is well taken and appreciated.
Kim, I knew you'd have a great answer. You always do, but thank you. And I don't have anything else. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you, Kim, for being
Thank
here.
you for having us.
Great, thank you. Have a good day, Glenn, you too. We're now on a 7th item. If you're following along on the agenda, as you know, with my departure after the September meeting in October, we needed to see how that was going to affect elections and of somebody to take the chair position and all of that. But we also got into the bylaws. I'm not going to steal your thunder here, Stephen, but we saw there was all kinds of peculiarities. And the peculiarities were it took less than half to be a quorum, and that doesn't sound exactly right. You could actually take and say, I designate somebody else to vote my vote, and that didn't sound like a real great idea. So Stephen and Chris have gone in and tried to clean up a lot of language. And I think they've done a good job. They've redlined it for your convenience. And the idea is to introduce it today and then hopefully vote in July. And don't think this is your only take forever. I mean, you can always bring back with a quorum and have changes in the future, but this cleans up a lot of old and difficult problems. So with that, Stephen, Chris, I don't know which one of you are going to jump into it, but please do.
Yeah, I'll walk us through it, I think. So thank you for that introduction, Commissioner. I think that pretty well sums things up. We earlier this year started looking at the bylaws. As you noted, they were last amended in 1995, and just a number of provisions that didn't necessarily reflect how we've been doing business as a committee. And so just things that needed some cleaning up. And then we've heard some through discussions that have happened in the meetings and a few conversations or suggestions that we've heard from committee members over the last several months. We've tried to incorporate some of those elements. And so I thought if you'd like, we can just kind of walk through sort of a section by section and just hit some of the highlights. They're all highlighted in your memo. Or alternatively, if you'd rather, we can just sort of field any particular questions or take comments.
Can you give a quick overview, Stephen, and then maybe take questions?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I think, again, just looking at the purpose section, I think just updating some terminologies there. Under the membership, we just made a bullet point list of all the different member jurisdictions. They were all sort of stuck into a paragraph a little bit earlier in the earlier version. And the language is a little bit weird in terms of it talked about members being appointed by city councils, but it also had a county representative and didn't clarify that the board would appoint the county representative. So just a little bit of cleanup in that regard. One suggestion that I think we had heard from some of the committee members was the desire to have the committee members themselves be elected officials, and also their alternates, their designated alternates, be elected officials as well, just so that we ensure that this policy group, that your group is the folks representing the elected bodies of each of the agencies. And let's see, and there was some language in there that talked about having metro or county and city representatives to JPAC and MPAC serving on the committee. And again, that seemed a little bit strange. So we've actually borrowed some language from C4 that clarifies that the intention is to have representatives that are serving on MPAC and JPAC serving on the WCCC as well as the R1 Act. But not making any of those requirements so that we don't get into unusual circumstances where someone's role on one committee may dictate their participation or role on another committee. So it encourages that overlap, but makes it so that it isn't mandatory. And I think that's felt like a good middle ground solution. We also added some language about non-voting member entities. So we've had a practice where we've had ODOT, TriMet, Port of Portland, and Metro as our non-voting members. And so there was no language in the bylaws that explicitly authorize that. So we've just added that in to reflect that current practice. With regard to officers, there was some desire from committee members, I think, to see more participation by all the different jurisdictions serving as chair. So we have proposed at this point essentially a rotating chair position. And I've heard a suggestion as well, maybe someone will offer this as a friendly amendment of potentially having the vice chair serve as a chair-elect, so that you've kind of got your current chair and then your future chair is known, and then that person becomes chair, and then you elect a new vice chair that becomes your next chair. So we can work through that as a group, I think. And really trying to just ensure that there's turnover every 2 years in the chair position. Just a little bit of specificity. And some of this was just cleaning things up, moving things around a little bit to where we felt like they made a little bit more sense. Regarding the chair's roles and responsibilities, the secretary roles and responsibilities. For procedures, again, we just cleaned up the existing language a little bit in there. No substantive changes there. The quorum, as Commissioner Rogers mentioned, we went up to 7 members, which is 50% of the voting membership. And then clarified that designated alternates that are sitting in place of a voting member would count toward the quorum. We did eliminate, as Commissioner Rogers said, the proxy provision that used to exist in there, so that one jurisdiction's representative could appoint another jurisdiction's representative. So our thinking is that with a robust pool of primary members and alternates, that every jurisdiction should be able to have a representative at each meeting. Let's see. Agenda. So there wasn't a specific deadline by which the agendas needed to be published. So we've put in a minimum of 3 working days, or 3 business days rather. And the reasoning behind that is every now and then we get right down to just a few days before the meeting and the JPACT agenda comes out and there's something that may need to adjust in the agenda. So we wanted to give ourselves a little bit less than our current practice of 7 days. However, our intention is to continue publishing the agendas 7 days ahead of the meeting, whenever that's possible to do that. And then if we needed to add or amend information, we would try to make sure that that happens no less than 3 business days prior to the actual meeting. And I think those are really the substantive things. I guess the last one was just under the amendments provision, sort of codifying, if you will, the procedure that we're sort of proposing that you go through at this point, which is introducing a proposed draft at one meeting for discussion, and then not acting on it until a subsequent meeting. And so that's just to ensure that there's ample time for everybody to review and vet any proposed amendments before they actually come before you for a vote. So those are the high points, and then we're happy to try to answer any questions or.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that Jason, Mayor Snyder, you've got a question as well as Councilor Sansuzi.
Well, probably more comment. First, I want to thank the staff for taking kind of all we provided a lot of disparate feedback, and to be able to take it and put it together in a cohesive way that I think is meaningful, I really appreciate, and thank you for doing that. That would have been very hard to do during a meeting. So thank you for working through that. I think that the vice chair to chair transition makes sense, and that you're really basically electing a vice chair each period of time that will then serve as chair next. Makes sense. So I'll just put my 2 cents in there since I'm speaking.
Thank you, Jason. I think Mark's next.
Yeah, thank you. There's nothing more fun than writing bylaws, in my opinion. It's always full of excitement. I have one small suggestion for a change, and then 2 things where you might want to clarify language just a bit. But I think overall, this is really, really excellent set of bylaws. And I think it clarifies all the things that were not clear before in a really nice way. I think the 2-year chair situation can work just fine. And I think selecting the chair-elect can work just fine. But I think it specifies in here that election is going to take place at the first meeting of an even numbered year. Given the fact that all of our terms tend to end at the end of even numbered years, it would seem like there'd be a higher probability that somebody's term would end in the middle of the 2-year period that they're serving either as chair or chair-elect. If you were to change that to have those elections be at the first meeting of an odd numbered year, you wouldn't have that risk quite so often, unless somebody gets recalled. But when was the last time that happened in Washington County? So that would be one suggestion for a change. The two other things that you just might want to clarify. In the section on tech committees, it says that they're going to follow the same procedures as the regular committee. We might want to just make it really clear whether or not, and this is maybe a question, they are subject to public meeting laws the same way this body is. And then the last one is in the very last paragraph about amending the bylaws. Thank you for cleaning that up. But the way that that is worded, somebody could choose to interpret that a little differently than was intended. It says these bylaws may be amended from time to time by a majority of the voting members of the committee. I think it's always useful to make it really clear that you need an affirmative vote from a majority of members of the committee. And that way, what you're saying is you need 8 votes out of 14 to change the bylaws. And I think that's a fair bar to set for modifying bylaws for a committee like this. It doesn't require a supermajority. It doesn't require, unanimous consent. But it means you can't have 5 people who want to change the bylaws and they just figure out a way to make that happen.
All of that makes great sense to me. I too echo Stephen and Chris. I know you guys had major hands in doing this and you took input, so thank you. Steve, I see his hand up.
Thank you. And this is a tongue-in-cheek clarification. If Stephen Roberts is not here, then do we go with Deffenbaugh's rules of order? Or do we always stick with Stevens?
Yeah. I'll always carry the day, I think.
Steve. Well, great. Is there any other questions? It sounds like we'll be voting on the next. And did you guys pick up the amendments one?
Yeah.
Is that we would go in this rotation of every, the vice chair would be elected and it would be a 2-year rotation. Another suggestion, which I think is a nice one, we'll go odd years on the, which makes sense. Then there was, Councilor brought up a couple, I think, really good points about there has to be 8 people who, or 8 jurisdictions, I guess, not people, but 8, well, I guess same thing, change bylaw. Yeah, I don't, why don't we have Pete and maybe Chris, you can answer him.
Any year in which Steve Calloway is elected is an odd year.
Yeah.
What
So
happened
I guess I would.
What happened to even Steven?
That's right.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I was just gonna ask, and I don't know if this is what you were gonna do, Chris, but is there general support for that change from even number to odd number years? I don't think there was any magic to that.
Yeah.
All right.
So, and if I could, since Stephen and I are going to be trying to figure this out on our own, can I get a clarification on Mark Sansucci's comment? I hate to, if this is an easy answer, you all just tell me, but maybe we need to put in there that you can only vote if there's a quorum. A quorum is 7. But if it's a majority of those present, I hate to do this to us, but if it's a majority of those present and there's a quorum of 7, do we need to say a certain number for the approval of the bylaws? Do you understand the little conundrum?
Well, I think the way that it's currently worded, it says it's a majority of the members of the committee.
Okay.
But I agree with that. I think it can't be a majority of members present at a meeting that has a quorum. It has to be a majority of the members of the committee.
Okay.
But I think you need to make it clear that that is 8, not 7, because 7 is the quorum.
Yeah. It's just that all the other votes require a quorum and then you vote. And so I just want to make sure that there is a distinction in clarifying the bylaws. So that's all. I don't want Stephen and I to spend hours trying to figure out the wording on that when we can ask quickly.
Yeah. And Chris, I think from our feedback, you understood it, right? It needs a majority of the membership, not a majority of the meeting.
Right, right. Okay, just making sure I got it. Thanks.
Yeah, good clarification. Thank you.
So one of the questions then with that is, we don't always have, the presence of Gaston. And so it almost creates, what I always felt was an unfair burden with the double majority, that it has to be a majority and you have to have 50% of the voters, which was, part of, I think it was Measure 5, which I thought, really could undermine the will of those, of the majority. So I guess I'd like some clarification on that, because while I agree that, for people who vote affirmatively, if it's a 4-3 vote and there's only 7 people present, that also seems to be a little bit out of balance. But, I think that it almost creates almost a 2/3 threshold as opposed to a simple majority.
And Steve, I think that's, well, that's true. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know that it creates the 2/3, but while that's true, what we're not talking about for regular business of this group, we're talking about literally changing the rules about how the group operates. And I guess that's a distinction I'm willing to make. I feel like it's a higher burden, kind of akin to adjusting the Constitution or something. I know this isn't that formal, but you know what I mean? Like, I think the burden and standard should be higher.
And that was the intent. I mean, I think if we go back through minutes of WCCC meetings for the last 5 years, you'll be hard pressed to find a meeting where there weren't 8 members.
Right.
I think
Yeah,
Keith has it. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, just very quickly, and then Mayor Mays. I was just going to say, I think Gaston is routinely the one city where we don't have consistent attendance, and I think everybody else is doing a really good job of being engaged. And I think, honestly, with Gaston, I just don't think there are that many items on the agenda that are super relevant to what's going on out there. So certainly understand why. So Mayor Mays, I know your hand was up. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Just for clarity, we're suggesting a higher bar in order to change in the future. I support that. Are you wanting 8 votes from the members to make a change going forward, or at least 8 attending and then a majority of those 8, so then 5 voting for?
So the intention would be, to have a majority of the total membership, not just the members present at a particular meeting. And so it would be 8 currently based on the current roster, but if we add or delete positions in the future, it would still be that majority requirement.
Affirmative votes from a majority of the members.
Okay, I'm happy with a higher bar to make this change. So, and the rest looks good.
Great.
So I think we'll publish a proposed draft revision then, and let the committee members take a look at it. We'll make sure to get that cleaned up, and then we'll publish a final draft in the packet for your action at your July meeting then.
Great. We'll get it all done. Thank you to both of you. I know it's a lot of staff work, and I appreciate it, and appreciate all of the comments from those who sent them in, and I know you've heard them, and you certainly have responded. So great. We'll get on the agenda next month. REFA program direction discussion. I think Chris, you and
Julia. Yes, and Julia's there too.
Good.
Yes, thank you. So it's that time again. What happened to my raised hand? It's that time again. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. It's that time again to provide for JPAC to provide direction on the criteria and process for allocating the regional flexible funds. And Julia and I will be quick. We just are going to share the TPAC's recommendation, which came out earlier in June with you. And then this will be on the JPAC agenda in July. That gives Metro staff time to write it up and distribute it. So it's not going to be on the JPAC agenda next week. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background information, and then Julia's going to cover the TPAC recommendation. And one of the reasons we're going to be quick is that we want to leave some time for Matt Freitag, who is going to present you with some questions on the some opportunities to give input on the STIP enhanced discretionary. They'll tell you all about it. So first of all, estimating, one of the key questions is how much money is available, and this is always tricky. And Metro staff works closely with ODOT staff to figure this out. And it's particularly difficult this year because, or questionable this year, because if the federal government approves infrastructure bill, there could be more money available. And it's even harder because it depends, not all categories of increased funding come to the MPO. So that we took that into consideration. You hear from Julia on the TPAC recommendation for that on that point. So using a moderate forecast based on sort of trends as usual, Metro estimates there'll be 142 million available. And of this, as always, off the top comes the repayment of the bonds that have been used for past rail projects, and the project development dollars have been spent, which is at about 65 million. And then there's about 35, a little over 35, almost 36 million allocated to regional programs, you know, the TOD program, the Safe Routes to School program, the ITS program, the corridor planning program, and the MPO staffing in lieu of dues. And then that leaves about 41 million available for regional flexible fund grants. There's two good news items though. One good news is that Metro is going to release 20 million of the natural areas bond funds for trail projects at the same time as the RFFA. And as you know, from Washington County and all those missed fund requests, trails are a very popular thing for people to go after. So there will be more funding available. It's going to be different criteria, a different evaluation committee, because the criteria and all for that has to relate to the bond measure that Metro passed for those for that program. But it will provide a little bit of a little release of the pressure from the pot, I think, just to know that there's some more funding available for trails, and it's local dollars. You know that federal dollars are very difficult to, challenging to spend. And the potentially other good news is that it seems like as of last Thursday, a bill may be moving forward at the federal level, at least on the House side. We have yet to see what happens on the Senate side. So it could be that we have more funding available for our grants. So that's the background information. I'm going to turn it to Julia, who is going to summarize the TPAC's recommendations that you'll see by July.
Thank you, Chris. So the TPAC met last week, I think it was just last week, to discuss this. And the recommendation was the culmination of public meetings, some preliminary discussion at the last JPAC meeting, and some input from there. So that's sort of what went into the TPAC recommendation. And as Chris mentioned, there is a target amount that they're working on, but there's also the uncertainty of many, you know, potentially a lot more money, but then costs of projects are higher, so things may change. But one of the recommendations from TPAC is to develop an illustrative list of projects that can be prioritized kind of above and beyond what ultimately meets that target threshold, so that if more money is available, those projects can be selected from. The other big discussion item and recommendation is dropping the 75-25 split. In past cycles, there was 75% that was allocated to active transportation and 25% to freight. My understanding is that was sort of arbitrarily created years ago when people were afraid that freight was going to get all the money. And over the years, it's sort of changed, and it caused some confusion, uncertainty, and actually the last cycle, many of the freight projects were also active transportation. So the recommendation was just get rid of that split and fold economic development, freight, those types of things into the other projects. So the next decision point that's part of the recommendation was, should it be the 4 policy priorities, which are equity, climate, safety, and reduce congestion, and an economic development component, or should economic development be folded into those 4 policy criteria? The recommendation from TPAC was that it is folded into those criteria as opposed to a 4+ criteria. So there's the dropping the split, staying with the 4 policy priorities. But there's also a lot of support for clarifying that the current performance objectives and criteria in the tables that are going to be seen aren't set in stone. They're more for example purposes, and they need to be developed more. And I say that because I certainly am going to want to make sure that they're developed in a way that makes sure that we're reflecting the economic development component, that it's not, that's not getting lost in the mix. So clarifying the table, making sure that the measures work and do what we want them to do. And then also direction that the work group that's working on refining those measures needs to have expertise in developing and applying those measures. It can't just be, you know, so a group that's focused on just one thing. It's got to be a well-balanced group. And then finally, it was, I guess, not necessarily a recommendation, but just an acknowledgement that the TPAC was not weighing in on weighting. That would be something that JPAC could discuss if they wanted to and have some priorities, but there wasn't a recommendation on the weighting. So I think that is it. Did I miss anything, Chris?
No, it's just that this came up at the last JPAC meeting. I think it was Ryan Windchamber brought up, should safety be our priority somehow? So we somehow do that. And we certainly hear a lot about that at every meeting about the safety needs. And so I think that at the JPAC table, there could be some question about whether there are extra points given to them that addresses safety. Although, as you'll hear from our staff, you know, everything we do with a goal of improving safety. So there'll be more discussion about that at the JPAC table, we expect. But that's any question about that. You'll see this more. It'll come back to you in July as we share the JPAC. I'm just not sure, you know, the agendas for JPAC don't come out till after the WCC packet. So this might be a case where we send out some supplemental information so you can see it before it goes in.
All right, well, thank you. Is there any questions? I know we've got a number of other items. Okay, well, thank you for the update. We'll jump over to Mayor Truax then on impact.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things. The next meeting coming up, breaking down barriers to affordable housing, information discussion item. There will be 5 panelists, including Nathan Teskey of Bienestar, Devin Ellen of the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, Tony Marnella of Marnella Homes, from Reach CDC, Alma Flores, and from Hacienda CDC, Ernesto Fonseca. And then we will also have the ever popular seismic resilient runway discussion from the Port of Portland. And that's it. They will be taking, we'll have a meeting in July, and then we'll be taking August off. There you go.
All right, thank you, Pete. Mayor Callaway on JPAC.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll have a regional mobility policy update, something akin to what we heard today. We'll have an update on the regional congestion pricing policy. We'll have a presentation on the TSMO, which is Transportation System Management and Operations. And Matt, who's here with us today from ODOT, will be providing an update on STIP Enhance. And Matt, I hope you knew that. I hope this wasn't the first time you heard that.
No, I heard about 10 minutes ago, so we're good.
Thank you, Steve. Speaking of Matt, good to see you. Tell us about the 24-27 for those who weren't at the last TAC meeting.
Sure, yeah, just a couple quick slides here. So there we go. All right, let's see here. Sorry, when I go to that, it messes my format. Let's see. Okay, real quick overview on the Highway Enhanced program. So the OTC approved $65 million for a competitive enhanced highway discretionary program for the 24-27 STIP. And it's going to make operational enhancements to highways to improve the movement of people and goods in order to enhance the economy of Oregon. Funds will be distributed around the state to eligible projects that can make tangible improvements. OTC has dedicated at least 30% of the funds to rural areas. OTC created this program because it believes that congestion is an issue that affects the entire state and the mobility of people, and freight is critical to Oregon's economy. At the same time, the OTC is aware that Oregon has many long-standing unmet needs on the highway system, and the enhanced program will support the strategic action plan priorities of ODOT. So next slide, please. So here's the allocations you can see for enhance. There's been in our entire program, there's been a reduction overall of about 300 million, but also some fairly significant changes in allocations in the various categories. Looking at enhance right there, the 65 million, you may know the OTC allocated 175 million total for the enhanced programs, but 110 million of that was for projects earmarked by the legislature in House Bill 2017. So that gives us 65 million remaining for the enhanced highway program. And I know it probably doesn't need to be said, but the enhanced needs far exceed available funds. Next slide, please. So a couple details on the enhanced discretionary. So you can see right there, 65 million in operational enhancements for the next STIP, 30% rural, is focused on congestion or freight conditions and benefit safety, accessibility, equity, and climate outcomes. So the communication is happening with various stakeholders. As mentioned, this was shared at the Region 1 Act just a couple weeks ago. And Chris Ford will be coming to the next WCCC meeting. He is our Region 1 Policy and Development Manager to share info on the next STIP and a little bit more details on this. And then you can see on the bottom there, projects that leverage matching funds may have an advantage. And let's see, it's distributed geographically across the state. As I mentioned, it supports ODOT Strategic Action Plan priorities, which our equity, a sustainable transportation system, and sustainable funding. So next slide, please. So here's our schedule from now through the end of the year. We're doing our outreach in various groups. Proposals we do by the end of August. We will certainly want to hear some feedback on proposed projects and ideas. And then we will generate the list and start into the scoping and the various analysis and continued input from the ACTS MPOs on projects, and then finalizing our list in February or March of next year. So maybe a little detail here, we'll be bringing the 125% list back to the ACTS for additional feedback. So that's where the December date's going to come in. Let's see here, next slide. I think we're about done here. Yeah, so if you want to look at the specific lists for Washington County, it's on the slides that were shared at the ACT. I will tell you that the one project that's on the list is 217 between Walker and Allen. So doing the planning phase of that to look at the effort. So with that, are there any comments or questions from this group before Chris will give you the real details next month?
I'm looking and I don't see anybody's hand raised. You might comment though, Matt, because the question was that a couple of slides back, it looks like it completely took away money from the Fix-It program, but there's a very good reason why that went down and had to do with some construction projects. Would you comment on that quickly?
Sure, yeah, if you want to go back up a couple slides to the funding allocations. Yeah, Fix-It did drop 50 million. But you can see the significant increase in funding for the public and active transportation, and then our ADA program. So those are a couple of priorities for the agency, looking at equity, looking at getting other needed elements of our statewide transportation system. You know, we have lacking ADA facilities and active transportation you all know about TV Highway and what we're looking to do through there. So that's where much of the funding went to reprioritize.
Why don't you address enhanced too, because that was a large decrease, but it was really some projects that were done.
Yeah, a big piece of that was obviously with House Bill 2017, they named projects. As far as the other reductions, unfortunately, I don't have all the details on that one.
That's okay. All right, well, I don't see any other hands
Roy?
up. Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Yes,
this
is
is
that you?
Callaway.
Oh,
Just,
I see.
quick question, Matt. In Region 1, are any of the funds already earmarked or kind of committed to any projects, or is it all open at this point?
For the enhanced program?
Yeah, anything like the Rose Quarter or anything like that?
Don't quote me on that, but I think since those were named in House Bill 2017, I think there is some allocation going there already, much like our 217 project that we just completed design and will be opening bids on later this summer. So I think, yeah, there are some of those that do have funds associated with them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I think Pete's next.
This doesn't have, and I want to thank Matt for the presentation. This is a different topic, so I can wait until.
I think we're all done. I don't see anybody else.
Yeah, I have some sad news. Last Friday, the former mayor of Maupin, Dennis Ross, died. We don't know the exact cause. He had been ill for some time, but Denny was the former not only mayor of Maupin, but also president of the League of Oregon Cities when I first started working on that. Denny is an Eastern Central Oregonian, had his values, and he and I had our differences, but we also had the opportunity to bridge that divide more than once. And I would like to think that we took advantage of that in learning to converse with each other and to share our ideas. And that his loss is a loss for the state of Oregon. Some very good people have followed in his footsteps, notably the current president of the League of Oregon Cities. And we mourn the loss of Dennis Ross. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that. And shall we go to the current president of the league, Mr. Mays?
Thank you, Roy. Thanks, Pete, for commenting about Denny. The Mayor Ross, small world. You know, he graduated from Maupin High a year ahead of my dad. My dad's family grew up over there, and he went off and served our country in the military and retired, and then came back home. He was a friend, and he definitely worked for the entire state, and he was LOC president. I was the OMA president, that stretch, or right around there, and so it's a surprise and sad to see that he passed. So thanks, Pete.
Thank you for bringing that up. Well, we're at the bewitching hour where I'm at after, and thank you all for your attention and attending, and meeting adjourned.